Okay, so before I make this video, I need to put a disclaimer. This video is being recorded as of March 15th, 2024. Before this video airs, all kinds of stuff could happen. Indeed, the data that I was using to make this video was actively changing, and I had to rewrite the script before I even finished writing it because the data, which in this extremely chaotic situation, is not clear. But without further digress, let's begin this. On February 28th, 2024, armed gangs stormed the Croix de Bouquet and Port-au-Prince prisons in Haiti and freed 4,700 inmates. These gangs were under the command of Jimmy Chazir, or more commonly known as Barbecue, the leader of the G9 gang. This was just one more step leading the country into ever greater levels of chaos. Simultaneous to the attacks on the prisons, the gang carried out attacks on the country's main airport, ending air travel in and out of the country. The Dominican Republic closed all access to the Haitian land border, making travel in and out of the country almost impossible. The self-declared Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, who was in Africa at the time, now seems to be exiled indefinitely, as he cannot re-enter the country, meaning that the country, in my eyes, inarguably is in a state of anarchy. Who knows how long this anarchy will last, but Barbecue seems to have state formation as one of his main goals. At this point, most commentary upon the events going on in Haiti break down into two things. Left-wing sources will say that it's all white people's fault for everything that has ever happened in the country that's bad. The second is that right-wing people will kind of just divulge and start saying, damn, this place sucks, what a shithole, it's hell on earth. And then they start talking about cannibalism or something. You could say that divulging on either of these tangents when talking about Haiti kind of bolsters one's ideology, and I think that's kind of true. But I think that the main reason that people do this is that the history of Haiti is an infinite chain of terribly stupid decisions and absolute chaos, which is almost impossible to parcel. It's almost impossible to start at a single point and work your way forwards. But that is what I'm trying to do here. There's no single point, though, where everything goes to shit, or even a single point where there's a relative calm and then things get worse again. The entire history of the third of an island nation is a finely woven tapestry of chaos. I tried to do the best that I could in order to understand this current crisis, but I don't think I did a very good job. In fact, I think that doing a good job is kind of impossible. The situation in reality is absolute chaos, and I don't think that anyone truly has a clear idea of what exactly is going on. So with that open acknowledgement, I will try the impossible and do my best to explain the current state of anarchy which has beset that country. The most stable period in the country's history since its independence was when the third of an island nation was ruled by the voodoo megocracy of the Duvalier family. The first leader is known as Papa Doc, and the second leader, his son, is known as Baby Doc. But in 1986, Baby Doc fled after there were mass protests breaking out across the country in opposition to his rule. And the United States signaled that it and the so-called international community would not tolerate this rebellion being put down. In the interim, where there was all these attempts to try and build a new stable government, there were 4 coups d'etats in rapid succession in the late 80s, and a 5th attempted one. With the military not being able to form a united front, the educated and largely exiled elite of Haiti favoring a democracy, and pressure from the international community, it seemed that the only and the most apparent way forward for the country was democracy. And so on December 16th, 1990, the country elected Father Jean-Bertrand Aristide in what is widely seen to be the first transparent and free election in the country's history. Jean-Bertrand Aristide was a famous advocate for democracy during the Duluvier period. He was also a supporter of liberation theology and a priest who was very soft on the voodoo question before he was ultimately expelled from his order, laicized, and got married. In the late 80s, there were rigged elections, but the victories were overthrown as part of a chain of coups. President Aristide was able to reign for a total of 8 months before he himself was overthrown in a coup on September 29, 1991. Aristide had attempted to force the end of the use of the military as a police force. The military and the police force, by the way, were unified as one. He wanted to put military officials who had executed civilians under trial in civilian courts as well. There was already an attempted coup against him before he even took office. Following the coup in September, though, as many as 10,000 people could have been killed, and 250,000 attempted to flee the country. In the wake of the coup, the United Nations embargoed the country and the United States threatened to intervene. Not wanting to resist the United States following the invasion of Panama in 1989 and the invasion of Grenada in 1983, the junta just gave in. The United States reinstalled Aristide as president by force. The United States then transferred its forces over at the United Nations, and the United Nations remained in the country until 1996. When Aristide returned to power, he abolished the military with the support of the United Nations and the United States. Few decisions in the history of humanity have proved more utopian than that fateful decision. Throughout the entire period of Haitian independence, the military led the nation, and while its rule was clearly not perfect, the perception that it was a source of instability was a misnomer, as has been borne out by the history following its disillusionment. When the military was abolished, so was the sovereignty as the nation, which had fought so hard to become independent through its first initial slave rebellion. Indeed, the end of the military meant the end of independence for the country. The next president was René Préval, who was elected by an 88% majority in 1995, and it's widely believed that that was an illegitimate election. We should note that he ended up dismissing the parliament and ruling by decree at the end of his term, a common policy we would see in the post-Duvalier period. Aristide would then be re-elected as president in 2000, an election condemned as fraudulent by the United Nations, the European Union, and the Organization of American States. Aristide's second presidency was marked by begging for reparations from France, its former colonizer, and the use of street gangs to maintain order and power since he had abolished the military. Following the death of Amoy Matier, who was a prominent member of the Cannibal Army, a gang which was directly allied to Aristide, the gang then turned on him and allied with ex-military exiles based in the Dominican Republic. The exiles, with aid of the Cannibal Army, then invaded Haiti and toppled Aristide from power in the 2004 coup d'etat. American forces directly intervened and saved Aristide's life and flew him out of the country. Of course, though, Aristide's response to being saved by the United States was to accuse them of engineering the coup in the first place. He believed that the United States and France had engineered the coup because of his begging of France to give the country reparations. Apparently, it was lost on him that France and the United States and the entire international community were giving Haiti massive reparations through its constant foreign aid, and arguably the interventions into the country to save the Haitians from themselves. Following the coup, the head of the Supreme Court, Boniface Alexandre, became acting president until René Préval was elected to a second term in 2005. Operation Secure Tomorrow was deployed by the United States, France, Canada, and Chile in the wake of the coup to establish order. As with the 1994 coup, the junta stood down and did not actively resist the invaders. So I guess Aristide could justify his claim that America had driven him out, had it not been for the unending amount of money that the United States, France, and several other countries throughout the world poured into Haiti. For example, at the infamous 2010 earthquake, the United Nations stated that $1.5 billion was given to Haiti in relief efforts. Operation Secure Tomorrow, though, was only an interim force to stabilize the country, and it existed only from February to July of 2004. Then, starting in June 2004, it was replaced by a full-fledged United Nations peacekeeping force, the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti, which was led by Brazil. That mission ended in April of 2017. Little over a year later, after the second United Nations occupation ended, the current crisis began. On July 7th, 2018, protests began to spread across the country regarding rising fuel costs. Haiti, which has little to no economic development, by 2015 had 90% of its economy apparently connected to the Venezuelan Petrocaribe program. I don't really understand the Petrocaribe program. I tried very hard to do so. The best I can make of it is that Venezuela was selling its oil under market prices to other Caribbean nations, and that the entire Haitian economy essentially revolved around this Venezuelan quasi-charity program. When the Venezuelan economy crashed, though, in connection to the oil glut of the 2010s and Venezuela's own peak oil production, the Haitian economy crashed with it. Protesters were concerned that the funds from the program were misallocated. For one thing, once the program went under, the entire power grid failed because Haiti, like most other Caribbean island nations, uses oil as its primary method to generate power. The decline in the economy led to bloody protests, which killed dozens. The economy would continue to decline with the onset of COVID and a powerful earthquake in 2021. Throughout all this time, there were frequent mass protests against the unpopular president, Jovenel Moïse. And these protests would often become bloody. Haiti, like many Latin American countries, has a long-standing gang problem. But the disillusionment of the Duvier family's right-wing death squads, the Teuton Macoute, in 1986, and the ultimate dissolution of the military in 1995, dramatically fed into the gang violence being an issue, as the right-wing death squads and the military doubled as a police force, which were essential in maintaining order in the country. Assadite directly fed into the gang's power by directly allying with them and using them in order to maintain power. Following the withdrawal of the United Nations in 2017, gang violence began to dramatically spike. The violence had reached such a fever pitch that by 2020, it has since become described as a gang war equaled in scale to the actual wars that take place in other countries between political factions in terms of its death count. Without the military, right-wing death squads, or the military of a foreign power like the United Nations or the United States, the central government and police lost control of the country. So on July 7, 2021, the deeply unpopular president, Moïse, was assassinated. His assassination is still unexplained, and there are numerous conspiracy theories attempting to explain what actually happened, but nobody knows for sure. Moïse was unpopular not just for the economic devastation and gang violence which were rampant within the nation. In the 2015 election, when he won the first round, it was suspended after there were widespread allegations that he was cheating. He, of course, then won his second presidential election, which had been delayed over a year later into 2016. This led to even more controversy as the opponents claimed that his presidency began from the original inauguration date, which was set after the 2015 election, and not from his actual inauguration date. 2 days before the death of Moïse, he had selected Ariel Henry to be the next prime minister of the country. When Moïse was assassinated, though, Claude Joseph was still the prime minister legally and held the position of de facto leader as both prime minister and acting president, self-declared acting president, until July 20th, when the United States and several other countries demanded that he resign in favor of Ariel Henry. Keep in mind, though, I'm calling Claude Joseph and then Ariel Henry self-declared presidents or self-declared leaders or self-declared prime ministers because neither of them hold legitimate power under the Haitian Constitution. When the president is unable to complete his term of office, under the Haitian Constitution, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is to succeed the president. The Chief Justice or President of the Supreme Court, Rene Sylvestre, had died 3 weeks prior to Moset's assassination on June the 21st. Constitutionally speaking, though, that would mean that the Vice President of the Supreme Court, Jean-Claude Theogene, should have this claim and should have become the president. Jean-Claude Theogene never attempted to exert his claim, though. There was already established a precedent for all this, though, because the head of the Supreme Court became the acting president following the coup in 2004 when the United States intervened to reestablish the democracy. President Mose had largely ruled the country by decree as president, and he had his own questionable election, as I already said, but then he delayed the legislative elections and appointments to high offices such as the Supreme Court repeatedly. The last election for the House of Deputies, or the lower house of the Haitian legislature, was held on November 20th, 2016. And when the 4-year term of the members of the House of Deputies ended, they all went home and the House of Deputies went vacant. Since then, Mose, Joseph, nor Henry have held elections for the House of Deputies, and it's remained vacant for the past 4 or so years. The upper house of the Haitian legislature, the Senate, has a revolving election system, so that only 10 senators are elected at a time. The last time the Senate had all 30 members was following the 2015 elections. In 2020, the first set of rotating 10 senators was set to be elected. But Mose delayed this election, and their terms ended, so they just left office, reducing the Senate to 20. Because the 2015 elections were already delayed at that time, during that election, 20 senators were elected at once. And so on January 10th, 2023, when all these senators' terms ended, they just left, and now Haiti has no legislature. I prefer to call Ariel Henry the self-declared Prime Minister of Haiti, since he was never officially sworn into office. He claims to be the acting president, even though that goes against the Constitution of Haiti. And he represents both the legislature, which no longer exists, and the executive branch of the country. Since Henry was only appointed to succeed Joseph 2 days prior to Mose's assassination, one of the most popular conspiracy theories to explain Mose's apparently unexplained assassination is that it was planned and carried out by forces allied to Henry in order for him to take power. Since Henry has no legitimate claim to power, he's widely hated within the country. He claims the control, and of course he only controls it on paper. The only thing that really gives him any kind of legitimacy is that the international community continues to recognize him as the leader of the country. Keep in mind there have been 2 assassination attempts against him since he began to claim power in 2021. Ariel Henry's most important decision, having ascended to become the apparent leader of Haiti, though, was to abolish its Provisional Electoral Council on September 27, 2021, just months after he had assumed power in July. The Provisional Electoral Council is the body in charge of elections, both presidential and legislative. The legislative and presidential elections had already been delayed by Mose. But with the dissolution of the Provisional Electoral Council, that meant that there was no longer any actual way for them to hold an election within the country. Ariel Henry justifies the indefinite delay of elections by saying that it's impossible to hold any elections, as the security situation is clearly out of control. It's impossible to hold these elections because the gangs would just rig them or prevent them from happening. There is a great deal of truth to this statement. Haiti, without a military, right-wing death squads, or a foreign power to enforce the elections, has no ability to control itself. Mose, prior to his assassination, had attempted to recreate the military, but this never really got beyond its opening stages. When the military was disestablished, the police force was established. Keep in mind the military and the police were the same thing prior to this. The police force and the Coast Guard, which are not the military of the country, do have some heavy equipment, but they're terribly organized and cannot effectively combat the gangs. And several members of the police defected to the gangs, including the most powerful gang leader, Barbecue. And it's obvious that there is corruption and kleptocracy, which means that there is a fifth column of gang members within the police force, or that the police force is actively allying with gangs against other gangs, as is the course of fact within almost any country where cartels become so powerful that they can effectively fight against the central government. Well, Henry has pretty questionable legitimacy due to the circumstances of the rise to power. He doesn't seem to understand the limits of this questionable legitimacy. He has expressed interest in drafting a new constitution for the country and proposed a new draft just months after he assumed power. That draft being proposed on September 6, 2021. By the way, at the same time he abolished the Provisional Electoral Council. Ariel Henry's master plan is to end the chaos in the country and reestablish order, is to have a third United Nations intervention and occupation of the country. Early after assuming power, he started grandstanding for this in the United Nations. And one of the things he did was to take notice of the great amounts of Haitian refugees which are crossing into the United States through the southern border with Mexico. He said that the refugees crossing from Haiti into the United States could be reduced if the United States led a fourth intervention. Right, there was the first intervention in 1915, the second intervention in 1994, and the intervention in 2004. The Biden administration has not shown any interest in doing so, though. Perhaps because of the 3 failed attempts in the past, or perhaps because the United States is quite frankly distracted with its heavy support of Ukraine, the chaos going on in the Red Sea, and its support for Israel, or perhaps because of the humiliation from its defeat in Afghanistan, or perhaps because it would not help to intervene in an all-black country, because that could help ignite even more racial conflict within the United States itself, or perhaps because the Biden administration has the explicit policy of taking in as many illegal immigrants as possible. Or perhaps it's all of the above. The Dominican Republic, though, would be the next most obvious contender for invading the country and reestablishing order. But that never seems to be brought up as an option. And maybe that's a good thing, considering the long history of conflict and ethnic cleansing going on between the French and Spanish speakers upon Hispaniola. It's not surprising then that it wasn't tried. After all, the Dominican Republic does not welcome illegal immigrants, and it does all it can within its power to keep the Haitian-Dominican border secure, forcibly deporting Haitian refugees out of the country and maintaining a militarized border wall with a militarized border police. But as the current crisis in Haiti grows worse and worse by the day, the Dominican Republic may be forced to act. In the last week of February 2024, it was estimated that 15,000 Haitian refugees had forced their way into the Dominican Republic. Such a dire situation could collapse the Dominican Republic itself if it's not put to an end. Ultimately, though, Henry's master plan was to have an African-led coalition of states under the auspices of the United Nations to invade the country on his behalf and restore himself to power. Kenya has been the country at this point which is set to lead this intervention. Kenya has a history of helping the United Nations and the African Union in peacekeeping missions, including helping end the state of anarchy in its neighbor Somalia in the 2000s. It is not at all apparent if this intervention will ever get off the ground, though. Factions within Kenya are trying to stop it from taking place. The Supreme Court in Kenya ruled it is unconstitutional. When the United States intervenes, let's think about this for a second. First it acts, and then it has the United Nations come in later, as the United Nations is notoriously terrible and slow and incompetent in intervening in situations like this. And that's what happened within Haiti in 1994 and 2004. Before this, Kenya has delayed organizing its mission for months. And even more crucially, Kenya does not have the ability to project power. For one, it's an East African country half the world away. And secondly, it does not have the navy to ship its army to Haiti without help from some kind of greater outside power, or even help from the Dominican Republic or the United States in the first place as a staging area. As far as I can tell, what's on the paper right now is there's supposed to be 1,000 Kenyan officers leading this invasion. I think that the level of violence and ambition of the gangs such as G9 with its leader Barbecue at this point, it's reached such an extent because he wants to establish himself as leader of the country, that you need to have an actual active invasion to put down these gangs, rather than the junta standing down, as is what had happened in 1994 and 2004. And that would mean at least tens of thousands of soldiers invading the country to reestablish order. And so this all brings us back full circle. For all intents and purposes, Haiti is clearly in a state of anarchy. It's impossible to say when a period of anarchy begins and when it actually ends after the fact. When I initially was writing this video, I had thought that Henry had resigned, and I made that as the mark of the beginning of the anarchy. But it turned out that this was misinterpreted and misreported by a lot of Western sources. It's been clarified that he would resign when order is established and a commission is erected to elect a new president in his place. Regardless, the man who is claiming to control that third of an island nation has never been properly sworn in. There is no elected legislator, and there is few remaining members of the Supreme Court itself. Much of the infrastructure is being destroyed right now for its bureaucratic buildings and offices, as the gang war is increasing and spiking ever more out of control, and powerful gangs like the G9 have taken it upon themselves to try and re-establish control and establish themselves as the government. And now Henry appears to be exiled in Africa. Even if it is impossible to say when this anarchy begins or to properly define it, you just know an anarchy when you see it. The situation is similar to the state of anarchy which existed in Somalia from 1991 to 2006. That anarchy finally ended with the invasion of Ethiopia. There are really two options, as far as I see it, to end a state of anarchy. Either a gang leader, in Haiti's case, or some kind of rebel group, possibly Barbecue of G9 or some other leader at a later date, ends up unifying the country in conventional state formation. And the second is that an outside power invades the country and puts a leader in charge. That's what happened in the case of Somalia with Ethiopia's invasion. As I said, Henry wants that second option to happen, and he wants himself to be placed in charge as the leader. What had prompted Ethiopia to invade Somalia and end the anarchy was the formation of a radical Islamic terrorist group, the Islamic Courts Union. Because the Islamic Courts Union, they were on their way to forming Somalia again as a state. And Ethiopia was given a lot of international support and aid, including from the United States, in its adventure, because the destructive chaos that the Somali piracy was causing in the Indian Ocean at that time. So I think it's yet to be seen if the Kenyan-led expedition outside of Africa will actually be organized, and if it could actually work if it were organized. It's far more likely to me, though, that the United States or the Dominican Republic will have to invade the country, and possibly there being an alliance between the two. I think, just as in the case of Somalia, with anarchy in Haiti, it's possible that piracy will start coming out across the Caribbean. And the United States definitely isn't going to stand for that, so that would definitely prompt an American intervention. If the current rate of refugees continues, then the Dominican Republic's stability will be threatened, if it has not already, and they will be forced to intervene to try and prevent themselves from going under. The world is currently waiting with bated breath to see what happens next in the seemingly unending historical soap opera which is happening in the seemingly cursed nation of Haiti.